So today we're starting week 7. So one of the things that I was thinking about is the components and stuff that we're going to be learning. I try to minimize it, kind of like the components, the amount of things we can learn about the components. The reason for that is I thought about all the things that I went through as a web developer, software engineer, and usually it doesn't come up. Like it's not like something you're gonna be doing all the time. So my main goal is like I look at like what usually is used in the industry, and then I try to like remove the things that is not kind of like everyday thing. So, but definitely these asynchronous JavaScript promises, HTTP requests, these are like mostly common. You'll see all the time. Components, building components is going to be a little bit, you'll see less of that since you guys going to be learning in the future React. So today's lesson, we're going to be focusing on building basic component and then jumping into asynchronous JavaScript. I hope you guys watched those videos I shared. If not, that's okay. We'll go over what asynchronous JavaScript is, and also we'll talk about promises, and we'll do HTTP request, also known as API call. So we'll do an API call. So you guys always heard about, APIs, API call. This API, that API. So we're gonna learn today what those are. What is an API? And then we're gonna make our own API call basically. So that's the goal today, inshallah. So the first thing we'll start with is we're gonna go back to the DOM manipulation thing, where we learn about the DOM and all that, but we're gonna build our own small component basically. Okay, so this is gonna be our project today. It's called the cat world or cat world. We're just going to be building this component. We're going to be building the image component and the description for the image and kind of like how it looks. It's like a little card. So we're going to be building that with JavaScript instead of HTML. Right now we have it as HTML. As you can see here is a basic HTML. We have let me indent this. Okay, indent. We have we have this div container. We have h1, we have h3 for the cats rule the world. We have an entry point, which would be important when we're doing the JavaScript version. But what are we building today with the JavaScript is only this part right here. Only this part. So this div, this image, and this h3, we're going to be building it from scratch instead of having it here on the HTML. So we're going to copy that, delete it. So it should be empty here, just the title. We're not going to worry about the CSS. It's already done for us. And then I'm going to paste it here. So this is the JavaScript portion. Instead of we're going to comment it out. So we can use it as like a reference, right? We can remove this image for now to make it kind of like readable. You see, so it's just a div, an image, an h3. Okay, so we're going to be building that, but to build that we need to create a function. So that function will help us kind of repeat the same thing. So when we build the function, remember that we could use functions to use it again and again, right? So like the concept of dry that actually I mentioned here, the dry concept. So instead of us copying the cat component of the card, instead of us just copy paste, we're going to create a function that will repeat it for us. So if we need multiple cats, then we don't have to create this div anymore. So we could create it once, and then JavaScript can create it for us. All right. Let me admit someone here. Okay. Handy, I'll make you co-host.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so now all we need here is the first step is create a function that builds a component for us, builds the card component. Then two would be we need to give that function the information. So we need to give the function data. So data could be image and cat name, right? So that's what we need to give the function. And then the last one would be we need to connect that function or whatever we created to the entry div here. So we need to append. So append, connect the function to the HTML. Otherwise, it will not show here. So these are 3 steps to building the component. Any questions so far? All right. So let's build that function. We could call it whatever we want. So let's call it create cat card, right? Just it's always good to be descriptive when creating a function. I have a book called I think it's called Clean Code. I have it at the back. Clean Code, it's a really nice book. It's one of the best books. It will teach you basically like how to create a good code that's clean. One of the things is you have to have like a descriptive names for things. So for example, functions, you name the function whatever it's doing. If this function was basically let's say adding 2 things, you wouldn't call it this, you'll call it add 2 numbers or something like that. So, and don't worry if you make it a long name. So if it's a long name, it's still fine as long as it's descriptive. It's camel case, as you can see here. All right, so that's the function. Let me zoom in so you guys can see it better. Okay. Yeah. So okay. Hey Hanan, welcome. How you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Sorry guys, it's been a while since we did the class. I think you guys forgot what you learned. All right, so let's continue, inshallah. So inside the function, we need to first create these elements. So these HTML tags, we need to create them. So first step 1 is create HTML elements, or not create, but select. Let's say so. Actually create, create, because they don't exist now. HTML elements. So that's the first step. Second step is we need to add the classes. So this one has a class, this one has a class. So we need to add the class. So step 2, add classes. And step 3 is add data. So data is image, and we need cat name. Okay, so and that will be passed to the parameters right here. So let's give it here image and cat name. Okay, does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Remember we did the create element, we did the documented dot query selector, all that. So we're gonna do that, but right now we're gonna create the elements first before we select. We're not selecting the elements now. They don't even exist. They're right here. They don't exist. So first we have to create them. So the first one we're gonna create is the top div, right? So the top div, we're gonna call it So we're going to create a variable. We're going to call it, let's call it main div. And then we're going to say document dot. So who remembers the method to create these HTML elements? There's a method. So let's look for, we could say document create HTML node or element is fine. Okay. As you can see here, it's a create element, right? So add that to your list of things to remember. If you want to create an element that doesn't exist in HTML, for example, this one is a paragraph. And remember, when you're creating an element, you have to give it the HTML tag, basically. So if it's H3, you have to give H3. If it's a paragraph, you give it P. If it's something else, you give it whatever it is, right? Does that make sense to you guys? So all we have to do is here create element. So what is this element that we create in the first one? What is the first element we're going to create?
The cat world.
So we're creating this. We're creating this HTML from scratch. So the main one we're going to create, the first one is this one, right?
Yeah.
So the first one, what is it?
It's the cat card.
Remember here when we're creating an element, we chose the HTML tag. So if it's H1, you say H1. If it's paragraph, you say P. If it's whatever it is, the element
So
is.
div.
So this one is a div. So all we have to do here is div. Okay. So the first one we create is a div. Second thing we need to create is remember about the child and the parent thing that we talked about. What is the second one we're going to create? We're just going in order, basically.
The image source.
The image right here. So we're going to create. So the image source, we haven't reached that yet. So first we're going to create the tags, right? We're going to create the tags. And then secondly, we're going to go to the attributes, basically. So the first thing, so next one we're going to create is the image. So we're going to create here variable. We're going to call it cat image. We already chose here image, so we can call it the same. So document dot create element. And then here we're just going to say image, because that's the name of the HTML tag. Okay, the last one. What is the last one?
H3.
H3, right?
Mhm.
Document dot create element. H3. And the reason we're doing all this, creating this function, is this function is going to help us create many cards instead of one card, right? Remember, I showed you the card, the cat, the cat name. I'll show you guys if you were not here. But there will be a cat. There will be a picture here and then a name of a cat. So we're creating that, and then later we could use this function to create multiple cards by just calling this function automatically. Okay. So this function is going to help us basically generate cards. All right. So we did that. We created the HTML elements that we needed, which were 3 right here. So 1, 2, 3. Now we need to add the class. So we have the first one has a class here. The second one has a class. Who remembers how to add a class to an element using HTML, using JavaScript? What was the thing we used to add a class? So we could go to Google. We could say add class to, it gives us already here. So okay. So as you can see here, we have one here. And we did this before. So we did the class list dot add. We did, what was the other one? It had another one here. Instead of add, what else can we use?
Remove.
Remember we did the toggle. It was the last lesson about the DOM. So it was, let's see, somewhere here. Create element, append. Let's just say class list right here. So class list has a couple of things. It has that dot add, dot remove, and then dot toggle, right? So right here, dot add, dot toggle, and it has a dot remove. So keep that in a note. So if I say how to add class list, you say classes dot add, and then you give it the class name, right? So over here right now, we're gonna add the div. We're gonna add a class list. Who can help me with that? How can we add that? What do we do? What do we select first? Do we create? Do we select the element? Do we say const div is equal to document dot get query or query? Should we do that? Query selector. Does that make sense to you guys? I want you guys to understand basically what we're doing is we have a function and we created the elements from scratch. So what we're trying to add a class to is these elements we created, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So where are these elements coming from? What? How do we know to create div image on H3? How do we decide that? Remember, we already have a blueprint here. So we're following this HTML that we already have, and we're just creating from that. So we're using create element to create this from scratch. Okay. And then we're gonna add class to it, because I want you guys to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense to you, I can repeat it. I can show you another example. So let me know if something doesn't make sense to you. Okay. So as I said, this function is gonna help us create multiple cards when we call it. But first we have to give it all the things that it needs to create that card. So first thing we gave it is the HTML tags. Now, if we just look at this, it will just show us basically an empty div, an empty image tag, an empty H3. But now we have to add class to it because we're following this. So we need to select the element we want to add the class to. So what are the elements we want to add class to?
Just the variables you created.
Yep. So we're gonna add to the variables, but which ones? Which variables are we adding class to? We're adding two variables. We're selecting two variables from here and adding class to them.
The ones that has a class.
And which one is that?
The main div and the cat image.
Yes. So this one and this one. And in here, they are here. So the main div and the cat image. So all we need to do now is say main div dot class list dot add, and then we give it the class name. We already have the class name, so it's right here. We copy it, do that, and then we're not going to see anything because we haven't called the function yet. So you're not going to see anything until we call the function. The second one is the image, and we're going to give it this class. We already have it created here, so we're going to say cat image dot class list dot add. Okay. So the classes, that's it. So that's all we need to add classes. Now the last step is basically adding the data, because now they're empty. They do have the class, they have the the HTML tags and everything, but there's nothing in it. So when we call this function, we have to give it an image and we have to give it a cat name. So in here, we need to give these elements their data. So right here, we have to select the main div doesn't have anything, of course, because it's just a main div. The image has a source attribute, so we need to add that. So let's do that. And also the last step, actually, the fourth step, there's one more step left, which is connect all the elements. Append child, I'm going to be using that. Okay. So to add the data, we need to select the source, the image source. So we need to say, okay, we need to grab the cat image first. And then the cat image, we need to select where we want to add the data, right? Which is the source, right? So the cat image, we need to add the data, the source. So usually when you have an element that's created, you say dot source. So that's the thing. So if we want to add, we could say here, add image source. So as you can see here, like that. So this one is saying get element by ID, whatever. It's grabbing that element by the ID of my image, and then it's adding an image. So to add an image, you say dot source equal to, and then you give the location of the image, basically. And then our location is this image, right? Because we're going to pass it. And then the last one is the title. So where do we add the title? Do we add the title to cat image again? Where do we add the title? Look back at the HTML. Where's which element has the title?
H3.
H3, right? And what is the name here for the H3? We created a variable of that.
Cat name.
Cat name. Although we might need to change, actually, because we already have a cat name here. So let's call it cat title here. Okay. So cat title, I'm gonna select this one, it's cat title, and then we add in a text. So who remembers what method do we use for adding a text?
Text.
Text,
Content.
right? I think it was
Yeah.
like something text content, something like that, right?
Yeah, the text content.
Text content right here. So we're just gonna say dot text content. It's equal to, and we already have that, which is the cat name here. Okay, so we added everything. So now we created the elements from scratch. We added the classes and we added the data. The last step is to connect all of it, basically. So to connect all of them, we need to think about like a parent and child. So in here, which element is the parent element in this HTML? Which element, which HTML tag is the parent tag? So we have the div, we have the image, we have the h3, and you could just look at it as like the indented. So these two are indented. What does that mean? That means they're children, right? Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the div, which is the parent, and then we have two children here. Okay. So we're gonna do that. So the first one is the div, which is the main div. That's what we're gonna connect everything to. So here's the connection. So we're gonna say main div. We're gonna say dot append child. Okay, so we need to give it, we need to connect a element to the main div, which is this div. So we're gonna connect these two. So the first one is the cat image, and second is the cat title. Cat image, and then we're gonna do the same thing again. Main div dot append child, and then the second is the cat title. Okay, does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
So we're basically connecting everything to the main div because we have two elements that are children, and we have one parent. If we had another div in here, div, and inside it we had another h2 or h3, whatever, then that would mean this is a child of this div, right? But we don't have that right now. I wanted to keep it simple so you guys understand the concept instead of thinking about all the tags and all that stuff. All right. So in general, we're done with the function. The only thing is we need to return something. So each function, always you have to return something. What do we return in this function? We need to return one element. One of these. We need to return one of these.
Main div.
Main div, because it's the parent, right? And every time you get the parent, you get everything else because everything else is connected to the main div. So we just need to return that. And that's pretty much it for that function. Any question? So now what happens if we call the function? Okay. So right here is step 2 is we call the function. So let's actually console log it because we just want to see what it returns. It's asking us two things. It's asking us an image and it's asking us for cat name. So we need to provide those two. So let's grab a cat image. Okay. It's pretty long, so I'm gonna just give it a variable. Gonna call it something like a new image. Okay. So we're just gonna keep it there. And right here, we're gonna call the function. So we're gonna grab the name of the function. And it needs two things. It needs an image, which is this one. We just created it. And then it needs a title. Let's call it Somali cat. Because it is a Somali cat. There's a cat called Somali, by the way. And now let's see the console. Okay, clear it. Save it. Let's see what it renders. Okay, So this is what it renders. It renders a div with a class cat card, an image with a class cat card, and a source of this, and then an h3 with Somali on it, and then the closing div. It just created everything for us, basically. And that's what we wanted. Any question? Okay, so the last step is we need to connect all that to the HTML that we already have, which is here. So we need to connect everything to the entry. So now here's where you guys help me, because we did that before. So we have an entry class. We need to select that. How do we do that? How do we select? We're doing selection this time. How do we select an element in HTML using JavaScript? That was what the last lesson was about. Selecting an element, this element, the class name, entry. How do we do that? Anyone?
Are you talking about the document.query selector?
Yes.
Okay.
So far as we need to create a variable, right? So we need to create a variable. Let's call it entry. Okay. What do we do after that? We're selecting this class, basically this right here. It already exists. We're not creating new stuff. You could go back to the lesson. We have a couple of them. We have here an example. You could use the other one by class name, but I recommend the query selector. So we have to say here document dot query selector. Always write a note. So if I say something like, how do we select an element using JavaScript? You should know query selector. If I say, how do we select multiple elements? You should know it's a query selector all, right? And if you write a note somewhere and you try it multiple times and you go back to it, eventually it'll just come to your mind, right? So keep that in mind. This is you take a note of this, because I'm gonna ask you again later. Okay. So now we said query selector. Query selector, remember, it's just like CSS, right? So if it's a class, then we have to do the class way, right? Entry. Right. So this is what we selected. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to append the function to this entry function. Okay. So what do we do here is we grab the entry, we say append child, and then we append the function to it. So we grab the whole function, we give it the function, and the function needs two things, of course. What does it need? What does the function need?
The image and the cat name.
Image and a cat name. So right now we have the image here. We already created it here as a variable. And then cat name, we're going to call it Somali cat. And then the magic happens right now. Right there. That's the magic. Any question of how did we get this card here? All right. And then the cool thing is, like, we can use this function to create multiple cards, and I'll show you that later. We're going to call API, and then it's going to give us a bunch of cat images randomly. And then instead of us creating a an HTML for each image and, very tiring. We're just going to call the function, and then the API is going to give us all the images and the names, and then it will automatically create a lot of images. Any question? Okay. So that is how you create a component using JavaScript. Is first, you have to know what you want to create. Okay. Second is you name the function. You pass the data that you want to show. And then you create the elements, the HTML tags. And then you give them classes. If there's classes, the classes need to exist already. They need to be in here, right? They need to exist. You could also add here a CSS. So in case you don't have the CSS, you could generate your own CSS using the method. There's a method called the style, right? We learned about it. That's 9 here. You use the style and then you add your own CSS. You add the data, which is of course what you pass in the function. Last thing is you connect everything and make sure it's connected properly, because a lot of times people confuse how to connect things. Make sure the first thing you need to connect things to is the main thing. So which is the parent element always. Okay. And then if there's more things that are nested, then that's how you connect them. Okay. And then the last thing is you return the main element, which is the main div now. And then outside, all we did was we selected a way to connect to the existing HTML, which is this, right? And then we said we basically call this and then said dot append child, and then we append the function to it. So whatever is inside the function is going to be connected to this entry point, and that's how we get the card. I actually skipped this, so it should be here. Okay. Any questions? All right. If there's no any questions, we're gonna move on to the next one, which is the async JavaScript. Okay. So I sent you guys videos. I hope you guys watch those videos. So some of the videos we're talking about async JavaScript. This one's talking about the API. We'll talk about the API later. So async JavaScript. Anyone can give me a description of what it is? Any idea? It doesn't have to be correct because you haven't learned it yet. But what do you think? What do you think is a asynchronous JavaScript is? Anyone want to take a shot? What is asynchronous JavaScript? Okay, that's fine. It's actually confusing for a lot of people, even more advanced people that know a lot about JavaScript. They get confused what asynchronous JavaScript is, and it's also very confusing because it's not in other languages. So other languages don't have asynchronous. They do have something else that covers similar subject, but JavaScript is unique in this way of using asynchronous method. Okay, so let's explain what exactly that is. Basically, what is asynchronous JavaScript? Usually, when I'm explaining this, I usually try to give a real world example so that it's easier for you guys to understand what it is. So let's use an example. Let me grab one of my. Did I remove that? Okay, I think I removed my or I didn't enable it. Draw on the page. Okay, let me enable that. All right. So let's try to understand this. Okay. In general, when we're running a JavaScript, so let's say you have a function here, and think of it as like the function we just created, right? The function we just created. When you run it, it just runs one step at a time. So if you have something here, it will execute that. It will execute this, like that. If you have multiple functions, so you have function 1, right? And then you have function 2 here. So the JavaScript engine is going to just run synchronously, right? Synchronously. So that word is where this whole thing came from, synchronously. Synchronously basically means like things happening in a sync. Basically, it's happening one after another, right? So this another function here. So the JavaScript engine is just gonna run just like this. It's gonna run this function 1 and 2. Okay, that's all it's gonna do. It's not gonna change anything. It's not gonna, it's not gonna run this one and then go back to this one, or it's not gonna run both of them at the same time. So the JavaScript engine, which is called V8 engine. It's not a car engine. V8 JavaScript. It's not a car engine. It's a Chrome engine. Basically, the browser we're using has an engine, has like a software that's running that executes JavaScript. It basically translates the code you write, and then it runs one line at a time, right? That's all it does. That's what we mean by synchronous JavaScript. So the problem with that is, let's say you have a function that you need to run, and then you need to run function 2, but function 2 needs something from function 1. Or let's say function 1 needs something from function 2. So you need to stop here. So let's change the color. So you need to stop here. Stop before moving on. And you need to grab something from function 2. So you need to stop here, run in this function. You need to go grab something from here. And then when that thing runs, you need to go back and then continue, right? So that's a problem if you have only one a thing that runs just like synchronously, just keeps going, right? Then that becomes a problem. So that's where the asynchronous JavaScript came. So the asynchronous JavaScript it's created inside the engine, right? It's inside this engine, the V8 engine, and it's called call stack. It's called call stack. The call stack is like a place where like you just put in the functions. So let's say we stop this function. You basically say, okay, this function, we're not running that right now. Let's put it in this stack. So you take this function 1, you put it here. Function 1 right there. And then now you run function 2, which is going to be here. And then when function 2 finishes, you remove it from the stack. So this is all done automatically. You don't have to do anything. This is going to be removed. So this is function 2. It's removed. And now you run function 1, and then its function is removed. So now if you run another function, it will just add it to the stack. If you run 100 functions and you want to grab something from like the 5th one, and then you go back, all that, this is all done within the call stack. JavaScript itself doesn't have a way to stop or run multiple functions at once. You cannot run multiple functions at once. So that's why we have the asynchronous JavaScript. So this is the opposite of synchronous, right? Synchronous is running everything, at once. Asynchronous, I actually described it earlier wrong. Synchronous is run everything at once. So like running like water or anything at once. And then asynchronous is the opposite, which is running one thing at a time, one after another, right? So all that is just to explain that JavaScript does not have a way to run multiple things at once, but it has something called call stack, which it puts in the things that it wants to run, and then it orders, like it changes the order, whatever the way you want. Remember we talked about like callbacks? This is where callbacks happen, basically. So callbacks are basically just, they're calling whatever is in here in the call stack, and it's a function basically that calls the bottom one or the top one or whatever, which one function you want, right? So in general, that's what asynchronous JavaScript is, right? It's confusing and it's hard to understand, but I'm gonna give you, we're gonna talk about promises in a second, and they will explain a little bit more what they are basically. I can give you like an example in a code. So let's try that. There's this set timeout thing. The set timeout is a callback function. It has a callback function in it, which is this. And you guys did the callback function several times. We did the advanced arrays. They have a callback function. So the callback function itself is asynchronous JavaScript. Does that make sense? Callback itself, the function that is being called inside another function, is asynchronous JavaScript. That's an example of asynchronous JavaScript, right? So let me give an example of that. Let me grab a new pen. I'm sorry if this is taking too long, but I want you guys to understand. I want to give an example of this set timeout thing so you guys can see. So let's grab the set timeout. This whole thing. Okay. This is a set timeout. It's just a function that already exists in the browser, right? So you don't need to create it yourself. So now the set timeout, basically all it does is it prints this stuff inside here after 1 second. So this 1000 means 1 second. If we make it like 5 seconds, you'll see that it'll take 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's pretty much it. That's all it does. But here's the interesting thing. So if we run this and if we console log something here, and we call it this, let's call it hello outside. Let's save it. So hello outside automatically just right away runs, right? So you can see. Then after 5 seconds, we have, so let's go back. So hello outside runs automatically. As you can see, the set timeout is the top. So it should have printed this, but after 5 seconds, it printed hello because this is delayed. So right now, this goes to the call stack, right? In that 5 seconds, the set timeout goes into the call stack. And then it says, okay, just go ahead and print this out. And then it prints this, the outside. And then it just goes back and fetches the set timeout after 5 seconds. Does that make sense to you guys? So that's basically the asynchronous JavaScript. Any questions about asynchronous?
So, Ma'al, anytime you have a callback function, is automatically asynchronous?
Yeah, all callbacks are asynchronous JavaScript. Yeah, the whole reason why you're using a callback is to create some type of, like, it's not a delay, but it's to create some type of like a way for the code not to stop. So let's say we have like a map here, and that map is basically mapping over some data. You don't want that map to stop what's underneath it. So you just want that to run. Just keep running, go ahead and like just map over your thing, do your thing, and then after you're done, let me know. So that's why you have that. Otherwise, it would have been, okay, the whole thing stops until that mapping over finishes, right? usually you use the callback with like API call, and the API call, you don't know when it's going to come back because it's connecting to a database outside, and you don't know when it's going to come back. So you don't want things to stop while that thing is loading. You could if you want to do it, like if you want to stop it, you could just stop it. But usually you want things to just go smooth, and like you want to print out what's underneath it, and then this is kind of spinning. You add like a spinning thing on it, and then when it's done, it will just publish whatever you send it to, whatever you asked for. So that's why we use callbacks. Any questions? All right, so that's good. So now let's understand, like we understand asynchronous. Let's understand promises, okay? Because the main reason why JavaScript we have asynchronous is mostly to use for promises. And promises are just what the word says. They're like something you send, and then you wait for that. It will promise you, it will tell you, I'll promise you I'll give you back something, either failure or success. So let me give you an example. I like giving example when it comes to promises. Okay, think of JavaScript promises. Think of them as I think the last example I gave was like a barber shop. Think of it as like a barber shop. So promises. Okay, think of it as like a barbershop. So let's say there's a barbershop here. It's open. I don't know. Usually there's a sign like that. It's open. And then you want to go and do a haircut, right? But they have a list of people. So this is the barbershop. They have a list of people here, and you add your name to it, right? You're like, hey, I want to add my name to the list. I want to go grab some stuff, some drinks or something. I want to pick up my kid from the school and then come back. Do you think it's going to be good? And then the person at the barbershop said, okay, yeah, you're fine. You have like 5-6 people before you. That's going to be like about like 2 hours or 3 hours. So you're fine. And then you put down your name here. Now you just left. You're doing your own thing, right? So you went and, grab drinks, pick up your kid. You took the kid to home, whatever. And then you're chilling. And then you're like, okay, it's time for me to go to the barbershop. And then you came back to the barbershop. And now you're like, the barbershop's like, okay, so the barbershop is going to give you two things. He's going to either say, you're good to go, let's do the haircut, or there's still people before you, or it will tell you basically, I can't do it. So it's either, they'll either say we can't do it, or they will say, yes, we're going to cut your hair. So that's called, so that's the barbershop took a promise. So took promise. They took a promise to either, so the promise can be false or true. It doesn't have to be like in the real world. I promise you, I'll grab you something. That's a positive. But in the programming, it's a little bit different. It means that the barbershop promised that they will give you a response. The response could be, sorry, we can't cut your hair. Or it could be, yes, let's cut your hair. So that's it. So you have, so that's what you have. That's what promises in programming. It's basically a response. So promise is like a response, right? Response. And it could be positive or negative, right? And in the programming world, it could be the database can give you the data, or it will tell you, hey, sorry, no data. Or, it'll just tell you nothing. There's nothing, or there is an error or something like that. It will not give you what you asked for, but it promised it will give you something, whatever it is. Either an error or what are you looking for? Does that make sense to you guys? That's what promise is in programming, in JavaScript in general. Does that make sense to you guys? I can give you more examples. For example, like if you go to like the DMV, and then they give you that little, I don't know if they do that still, but they give you something. And someone said actually they give you a thing that makes a sound or something like that, or I think it's an app or something like that. And you can just go do your own thing, and then when your time comes, it will vibrate or something like that, and you have to come back. So it's just that promise is basically a promise that the database took to give you a response. Okay, so let's read the what's written here. We have a few different ways to approach asynchronous code. In the last example, we saw the use of callbacks, which you already understand. You guys understand what callbacks are and how to use them. Other concepts, so there's different ways of doing promises. One way is something called async await, which is similar to like exactly what we're doing with the promises. So you don't have to worry about it. Promises are designed pattern for use when handling asynchronous code in JavaScript. We use them as alternative to nesting multiple callbacks. So promises are basically kind of like a way of doing the same thing that callbacks do, but instead of using callbacks all the time, you use promises. Sorry about that. Okay, so implementing promises is not something that you need to do very often. So we're not gonna write our own promise, so you don't have to worry about that. Usually promises are written in the backend. Okay, we just need to consume promises in the front end, and we'll see what that means, to consume promises, especially in the front end. However, understanding how they work under the hood will help you deal with them. So I just explained exactly like what in this image, basically what the promises do, the barbershops, like the database and all that, right? Okay, so hopefully that gives you like overview of what promises are. But we're not going to create any promises, all that stuff. All we're going to do is we're going to consume promises. And there's one way to consume promise is if, let's say, the barbershop says, hey, good to go, let's do the haircut, right? So this is called success. So let's write that. Success. So success, we're going to use something called dot then. Dot then is a method, right? And it's only used when there's like a response that's success. So basically the haircut. If there is a failure, so the response is basically we're closing, sorry, we can't do your haircut. Then we're going to use something called dot catch. Okay, that's it. All you need to know is that then dot catch, and I'll show you how to implement that in code. And all you need to know is that when you use that then, it means the success response, and then that catch is the error, basically. Basically, you're catching the error. Any questions so far before we dive into it? Okay, so before we use this dot then dot catch, I want to explain an API, what API is, because we're going to be calling an API. Anyone can give me a brief overview of what do you guys think an API is? What is an API? Anyone? What does API stand for? So it's an abbreviation of 3 words. It's right here. It's in front of you guys. Yeah. Application programming interface. Okay, what does that even mean? That makes absolutely no sense. What is an API? Okay, let's think. So you always hear something about like, oh, Twitter API, Facebook API. Can you connect to the API? Does your company has API? Da da da. You guys hear that all the time, right? So that's what we're talking about. It's basically, think of API as a basically like the video you guys watch, it gave an example of like a restaurant. Think of it as a restaurant. So you have the restaurant will give you like a menu, right? It'll give you a menu, you'll have the food, and then the restaurant is divided into like, this is basically where this is the part you see. So these are the tables and all that, and all that stuff is a nice part. And here's where they're cooking the food. They have all the machines and all that, and the smoke and the servers and everything. People are just cooking things. You don't see this part. You only see this part. So the part you see is beautiful, it's clean, it's nice. The part you don't see is like smoky, all that, right? So you're looking at the menu and you're like, oh, okay, I want to order bris and pasta, whatever, federation, and you know, all that stuff, all the good food. So you're basically, you are the browser, basically. You're ordering something, you're the browser. This is called, your name is client. You are the client. Client is the browser, basically. Browser. You send in a request. This is called HTTP request. Why is it HTTP request? You send in over the browser, and the browser has HTTP right here. You guys see at the top here of every website, it has HTTP, right? What is an HTTP? Because sometimes it's good to understand things a little bit deeper. HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's what it stands for. What does that mean? That means it sends a text over the browser to a website. And a website is in a server, basically. It's in like a computer in the cloud. They call it the cloud, but it's not cloud. It's just another computer somewhere else. So I don't want to go deep into it, but basically you send in the request you send in. You're like the person sitting at the restaurant. The request you send it over the HTTP. That's why we have like HTTPS, which the S is, what does the S stand for? Who remembers this from anywhere? What does the S stand for?
Security or system?
Somewhere, something like security, yeah. Okay, let's add the S. Okay. So S stands for security socket, basically. So it's that basically it's like it's making the website secure. You don't have to know. It's right here, security socket layer. I mean, that's the general name of what the S stands for. It's just S now, but it's actually should be like SSL, but they didn't want it to add all that. So security sockets layer, that's what the S stands for. It basically makes sure that the request you send in, which is the request, the bris and the pasta, whatever, they're making sure like that request, nobody's like, let's say someone is sitting this here, and if you don't have the S, they could just say, hey, bring that request here, and then they could just change something, and then okay, keep going. That's how hackers hack websites, basically. If you don't have the S, that's how they can hack. They could just hack this request here that you sent before it reaches to the backend or the database or whatever, the server. They could just change it a little bit and then just forward it. There's a whole thing about hacking and all that. So we send in HTTP request, which is our order, to the database. And then here, right here is where the API sits. API. It's basically an interface between the backend and the front end. Oh, sorry. Hani was a co-host. I'll make someone else. Hanan, I'll make you co-host too. Mohammed, you guys could all be co-hosts. All right. So the API is, as we said, it's an application programming interface, right? Is an interface between the front end, which is basically, unless you have the S here, it's basically not secure. There's a lot going on. And then we have the database right here, and the like the server, which are secure. So you cannot just get in whenever you want. You have to have there's a requirement to get in, and your requirement is basically someone sitting here. They have to send that request, and then they know you. Basically, you're in the restaurant. They know you. But if like a homeless person walks in and they say, "Hey, can I get the same thing as that person is getting?" You know, and then they don't pay for it, then they can't get the request, right? So the basically the security here is like the payment. If you're not gonna pay for it, you're not gonna just walk away, right? A lot of restaurants ask you to pay upfront before you even eat, so that means you're blocked until you pay for it. So the API could be secure, or it could be an open API. So there's something called open API, which means anyone can access it, like the one we're going to be trying, which is the CATS API. And there's secure APIs like Twitter, like Facebook, like all that. They don't just allow you to like access their API, right? They don't allow you to just, unless you're logged in, you have to be logged in. And then they give you like code or something, or something to verify who you are. There's a lot of steps to go through, right? So that's what API is basically, is that interface between the browser on the outside world and the server on the backend world. Does that make sense to you guys? Any question about API? So think of it as the bris and the pasto and hilib ari and all that. I don't know if you guys eat that. It's the HTTP request. If you don't add the S, it means anyone can modify. And then when you get back later, you will get back hamburger or something. And then that's all you need to have the S. Right? Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's actually make a API call of our own. Did I save what I created earlier? I think I did. Let's go to the list. It was, where is it? Yeah, it's right here. Okay. So this is what we created earlier. Created a cat. Now we're going to find something called the cat API. There's an API for cats, by the way. It means you could get as many cats as you want, images and all that. You could get random cat images. There's an API for dogs. There's an API for everything. These are called open APIs. Sometimes if you need like a lot of stuff, like here you get like tons of requests you have to pay for. But for like 10,000 requests, basically it's free. All right. And then here you could just choose random images. All this is amazing. Who has a cat here? Does anyone has a cat? Maybe Hani and Hanan, you guys have cats?
I'm terrified of cats.
Terrified cats? Really? Why?
Yeah, I don't know.
The cats are very adorable.
Mhm.
I love cats. I just don't have cats, but I love them. I used to have cats back in Somalia, but then we couldn't have them because my dad, he brought chicken to the house. We had chickens, so one of the cats used to eat the chicken. Yeah. I used to have 3 back in Somalia. Yeah. Somali, you have cats and stuff. They're actually wild cats. There are a lot of wild cats. So wild cats are just basically they eat everything and like they're very violent. But yeah, most of the time you don't keep it as like a pet. I had it as like a pet for a little bit, and then my family were like, no, we have chicken and we can't have cats and chicken at the same time. So we had to give them up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But most of them are like wild cats in Somalia. Like they're not like domestic, so they will eat like your chicken. So you have to be careful. The Somalis, they don't like cats. So yeah. But yeah, in general, like they're pretty nice animals. So now what we need to do is we need to like instead of hard coding this image, we need to grab the database, the API. So there's two ways to call API, but I'm gonna teach you one way. It's something called Axios. Axios is basically just a small software someone created where you could use it to call API, right? There's also another one, unless you see, in case you see this, it's called Fetch API. We could use this Fetch too, but I like the Axios because later we're going to be using Axios. So the Fetch API is built in JavaScript. You don't have to do anything. It's already built in there, but it's a little more confusing. So that's why we're not using it. So these are going to help us make the request. So remember I said like the HTTP request here. So right now we want to ask for cat images. We want to make the call, but the browser does not have like it has this fetch API thing built in. So you could use that, but we want to use one that is like third party. So this one is built by someone else. The way to use it is first we need to grab this, right? So there's different ways to do it. There's the npm. You guys gonna learn this later. You don't have to worry about this, but there's a link here. We could use this link. So basically, we just copy this script, and if you have like HTML website, right now we have the code bin. If you have the HTML, you put it in the header, right? You could also put it on the footer. Usually, if it's JavaScript, I'll say put it in the footer. So right before the body tag. Right now, we're just gonna put it in the settings here. This will help us basically do the same thing. So right here is where we're gonna put. That's all we need to do. So we just added that there. And this is basically, think of it as like the footer or the header. It actually says header here. The header of your HTML element, HTML file. So that's what we need to do. Now we could use that Axios to make API call. So let's do that. So here is the last step is make API call using Axios. Okay, how do we do that? You usually just go to the documentation. So in the future, when you guys kind of understand how to do the code and all that, I would recommend usually to read here. So here, introduction. What is Axios? Axios is a promise-based HTTP client for Node. Think of Node as like just JavaScript and the browser, basically. And then here is an example of how to use it. All this. You don't have to worry all about this. I'll show you in a simple way. So now we have this. Instead of doing this right here, basically we need to get this function. We need to get the data for this function from the API. So let's get the API first. So the first thing we need to do is we need to just call the word Axios. And then we need to get a method. So Axios has a method called get. So get means remember we were doing the request. You could say there's different requests. There's get, like the word get, basically. Get means basically get me something from the database. There's a post, and you guys will learn this in the future, but post means I want to send some data to the database. So post something to the database. So it's like the postal office, basically. So you're sending something. This one needs more, it's a little more harder, the post, because if you want to change something in the database, you need to know, they need to know who you are, basically. You can't just change whatever. We cannot change like the cats. We cannot add cats to the API we're doing right now, because it's not our API. It's not our like website. So you cannot just modify it. If that was the case, then hackers will modify it and just delete everything. So these two are the main one. There's also another one that's called put. The word put. Put means update. So you have already have some data in the database. If you want to update it, you use the put. And then there's delete, basically. Okay. So those are the four main ones. Okay. So all we do now is get. And get is usually the most like innocent one, because you're not modifying anything in the database. You're just asking, hey, can I have the cat images? You don't know you don't know me, but like I just want the cat images. So that's basically what we're doing. So we say here dot get, and now we just basically tell it where to grab the images. So we go here. I already have the link, so I'm just gonna copy it. We're gonna put it here. So that's where we're getting it from. API, the cats API.com/version1 breeds. So this will give us a lot of cat images, right? And then here's where we talked about, remember we talked about that catch. This is where we do the dot then. So we say dot then means it's a function. It means basically if this is true, like if cats come back, if we have a lot of cat images, then do this, basically. All right. So we say here, usually you move the dot then to the second line like that. And then you say here, okay, you give it a callback function. So usually you say res or response, and then give a callback function here. And then inside the callback function is basically the response, whatever comes back from here. So now we could just say console log here, and we can see what comes back. If anything comes back, response. So let's see how here. Ooh, okay. So a lot of stuff came back here. So as you can see, this is like a object, or they call it JSON data. See all this data, you see the name, you see image, all this. So these are all the things that came back from that database, this database here. So now this means this is the success. So we have something. Now we could do whatever we want to this response then. It's a lot of data, so we have to loop over it. So, and I'll show you how to do the loop over it. But before we do that, let's do the catch, because in case this doesn't work out, we need to do the catch. So right after this, we say catch. And it's just a callback function. So we're going to say it's an error. And inside it, we could just console log that error. Okay. This will not happen unless we have an error. So if we have an error here, so if we say breed instead of S, you just say breed, you see that it will give us a response of error. It will say message, request failed with status, blah, 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 all this data that you could use. You add S, and that means success. Does that make sense to you guys? Any question? Let's indent things properly. Any questions? Okay. So now all we need to do is the data that's coming back from here, we need to give it to this function. I mean, this function right here. So we need to do this whole entry dot append the child, all this inside here, inside the success. But before we do that, we need to loop over the data because we have like a tons of stuff that we don't need. And later, like when you get a API, you have to understand the data first. Okay, what is coming back? Okay, what do I need from here? I need an image. Okay, so let's see. Do we see an image here? Okay, I see an image here. So what you could do is you could copy this and see, okay, can we see this image? Let me copy it first. Can we see it? Is it a cat image? No, it doesn't copy. But you want to see if that's actually the cat's image. You want to understand the data basically coming back. You see weight here, you see ID, you see name, probably this is the name of the cat, all that stuff. So that's what we need to understand. But let's do looping over. Okay. So we say response. Here we say response dot, we could use map, but we're actually gonna loop over the data. So the first one here, which is an array here. Remember we learned about the array, array of objects. We learned all that. So if you misunderstand this, just go back to that lesson that I showed about the data that we had, like hard code data. This one is coming back from a database. So we say data dot, let's use for each for now. Okay, for each. And then we use the callback function again. We could just say cat, because we're trying to grab each cat separately. And then let's console log here, because all the time you want to make sure like you're getting the correct information. So let's just say cat here. What are we getting back? So as you can see, each one is one cat. The information of that cat, all that stuff, which is great. So, so what do we need to grab is the name of the cat. So we could just say here dot name. So if we say that, it should show us a lot of names. See, all these, there's Somali in there too. Okay. And if we say image, it should, image, I think, is in image.url. I already have it written somewhere. So these are all the images of the cats. Okay. So now that's all we need from this. But we need to put those in a variable. So let's say let or const whatever, const name is equal to cat.name, and then const image is equal to cat.image.url. Okay. So now we have that, but we have to call the function inside here and then give these two, right? So let's grab this whole thing, put it here. Now, instead of this new image thing, we're gonna give it image. Instead of this Somali cat, we're gonna give it a name. Okay. So now our website should be better. All these cat images. Right? Sorry if I went too fast. We can go back, explain what happened. So we called Axios. Remember, we added Axios here. Always make sure you add Axios here. Later, we're going to learn how to use npm to install it. But for now, just add it in your header, that script. We give the API. So this is the API. We said that then because this is a promise, remember? So all APIs have to be promise. Just keep that in mind. They're all promise. So you could just use that then. It's already like in the system. So that then is a response, success response. And then we said, okay, let's loop over all that data. In the homework, we could use something simpler, so you guys don't have to. You have to do the looping, but you could see clearly like what you want to grab and all that. So I'll try to make it simple. And then we just grab the name on the image, and then we call the function append child to the entry element, which is this. And then we gave all the images and the cat names. And that's why we see this. Any question? Any questions about that? If you ever hear an API or API call or make an API, this is what it is. This is all. This is the API call, right? We could also do like the dog API. Just yeah, we could grab the dog API just to show you like you could use any API with that. So we don't want random. They're the same, so we're just gonna say here. Just need that part. I think we could just do this. And then we need to know the response. Answer log response. We have issue. So it gives us the response for something went wrong because we didn't grab the correct one. Documentation. I think it's this one. Something is wrong. There's a space there. Okay, so as you see, it gives us all the breed and all that stuff, which is great. I don't think there's image. I'm not sure why. But you can see that the response, it wouldn't show here because it's not the same format. We could, yeah, we could, you just have to learn how the format is basically here. What are these and what does that mean and how do we do that? It gives us this. Browse breeds here. Yeah, I think we have to just grab this. And then we have to give it the breed. It'll give us an error. Yeah. So it's basically figuring out what do you need. Let me get a simple one. Boxer. So the response should be good now. Do you get it? Not sure. Still something wrong. But it's basically figuring out like what do you need and reading the documentation here of what do you need and then grabbing that. Any question? Okay. It's not working for me. That's fine. All right. I'll probably get the fix the homework. We don't have it right now. And then I will make a small video about it, explaining what it is and all that stuff, inshallah. But I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, we did the whole thing and I think we're good. Any question? Okay, I think it took a lot longer than I expected, but it's all good. All right, guys. I'll send you a video of the homework and also the link and all that stuff, inshallah. If you haven't finished the one before, try your best to finish it. This is the last one, by the way. So the next thing would be week 8 would be project. And inshallah, this project, I'm going to be working on it this week. And I'll try to show you guys the next Sunday how the project is and how we're going to do it. We're going to work it as a team. So each person will have responsibility. We're going to do the whole thing of responsive design and everything and API calls and all that stuff, all the good stuff. So inshallah, it's going to be fun. Okay, so sounds good. All right, guys. Thanks for